Now let's take a look at local news where Nigeria's annual inflation continues upward trend by climbing to 27.3% in October 2023, and that's the highest since August 2005, up from 26.7% in the prior month. Prices of food, which is the most relevant in the CPI basket, picked up to 31.5%, in October, and that's the highest since August 2005 from 30.6%. The annual core inflation rate, which excludes farm produce, rose further to a record 22.7% in October, accelerating from September's reading of 22.1%. Now, on a monthly basis, consumer prices rose by 1.7% in October, following a 2.1% surge in the prior month. Now, Professor of Finance and Capital Markets at Nasarawa State University, Uche Uwaleke, joins us now for more. Welcome to the program, Professor. Good afternoon, and let's get straight into this conversation. Now, the numbers continue to rise, but one key factor that we do have to consider is that they have slowed down in the pace in which they're rising. Now, of course, we've witnessed the appointment of a new governor of CBN. He's yet to conduct his first MPC. Is he delaying? Are we happy with the rate at which CBN is, under new leadership, is responding to the current economic situation?
Well, to begin with, the rise in inflation is worrisome. Worrisome in the sense that across the globe, in many parts of the world, inflation seems to be on the decline. In the US, for example, we've seen inflation climb down from 9% to about 3.2% now. In the UK, inflation too has dropped from about 11, a high of 11 to about 4% now. In South Africa, the same. Inflation rate is as low as 5%. Ghana, recently, we saw inflation rate also decelerating from a high of 56% to about 35% now. But in our case, it's the reverse. Inflation is still is still a challenge. And the disturbing part of it, again, is the fact that food inflation has crossed 31%. Okay, now you made a point. I think there are other tools of dealing with inflation at disposal of the central bank. So it's not just about the monetary policy rate, which you would expect the Monetary Policy Committee to be attending to during their meetings. So I want to believe that the new CBN governor has been using other tools, open market operations, in particular, to see how inflation can be reined in. And we're also beginning to see the results of that, just as you rightly pointed out. The inflation rate on a month-on-month basis actually dropped from what we had in September, meaning that the rate of increase is slowing, even though I think that may not be sustained. Number one, we are entering the festive season. And again, if you also look at the major factors driving inflation, as mentioned by the National Bureau of Statistics, the major drivers are still the legacy issues to do with transport, issues to do with insecurity, which is also what is causing the food the food pressure. So overall, I think the inflation, we may not see an end to this until maybe probably sometime in Q1 of 2024.
Indeed, we might not see an end to this until the first quarter of 2024. What do we do until then?
Well, I think the government should, continue to work with the numbers, the evidence we have. As I said, if you look at the figures by the National Bureau of Statistics, food inflation in some parts of the country, for example, in Kogi State, recorded as high as 41%, increase. Core inflation appears to be weak in terms of rate of increase, because it's just it increased by just 22%. The pressure actually is on the food component, where we have it as high as 31% on the average. And part of why core inflation, we had that number for core inflation is because of the new definition of core inflation by the National Bureau of Statistics. Initially, core inflation was all items minus, farm produce. Now, the National Bureau of Statistics have also added energy. So energy is also being included. According to them, in their argument, fuel prices have now no longer determined by, no longer regulated, now more determined by market forces, and therefore it becomes volatile. And to that extent, they have now pushed it away from the core component. So that's why you now find that core component appears not to be increasing as much as we have in the case of food. So the evidence is there. Where is the pressure coming from? The pressure is coming from food. So what do we need to do? In the interim, we need to keep working on the food aspect, the supply side factors. Not necessarily looking at, yes, the demand side factors are also there. Issues to do with, rising fiscal deficits, government fiscal surprises. We've seen increases in allocation to FAC, in recent times. All these are also putting pressure. So the pressure we'll have on inflation today in Nigeria appears to be, double-barreled. You have on the monetary side, you have this, increase in money supply. And on the supply side, we're also having these bottlenecks, to be tackled with. So what this central bank needs to do, really, is to explore ways to join hands with the fiscal authorities to deal with inflation, because the problems confronting us in this country with respect to inflation is not something the central bank alone can do, given the evidence, what we have out there. So it's important that the two should work together to see how inflation can be wrestled. But as I said, realistically speaking, if you look at the trend, if you look at what has been happening, particularly the influence on the exchange rates, we may not see, we may not have a breather until much later next year. Why do I say so? I say so because much of the effort the government is putting in place now to deal with the exchange rate challenge appears to be on the supply side. Okay, government is trying to see how they can get some dollars to calm the markets on the supply side, but not much is being done on the demand side. And as long as we don't fix the demand side as well, even when we supply these dollars in the forex market, it will also end up being mopped up. Okay, so it's important we deal with the demand side as much as we're also dealing with the supply side. Recently, we read that I think the Zambian Malawi president banned all foreign travels for all government officials until the end of the financial year. So imagine if we did that in Nigeria. Okay, that will also help to reduce the demand, for the dollar. The same goes with what I've always argued, that in this country today we need a Buy Nigeria law. We have tried executive orders in the past, executive order number 5, signed by the then acting president, Yemi Osibanjo. But we've seen executive orders don't have bites, as much as you would expect. So what we actually need in this country to be able to partly address the demand side is a Buy Nigeria law that will clearly, specify that no purchases must be made, especially when it has to do with using taxpayers' money, okay, for foreign items when those items are, available here. We've had a similar thing in the U.S. recently, when the U.S. government, the U.S. In 2021, came up with the U.S. Build America, Buy America law. So I think that is the kind of thing we require at this moment. So the government should, while they are also looking at the supply side, what to do, they should at the same time be also looking at what to do to reduce the demand pressure on the dollar. If you don't reduce the demand pressure on the dollar and you bring supply, just as some economists will tell you, supply creates its own demand. The more you supply it, the more the inefficiencies in the demand side will also mop it up, and you end up not achieving your targets.
Right now, of course, we are far cry away from the season where the slogans, if I may call them that, that were popular were, production over consumption. But this is where we are now. I'm glad you made mention of some of the fiscal components that are putting pressure on our current inflation rates. And the Economic Intelligence Unit also highlighted fiscal expansionism as a key driver of inflation going forward. You've mentioned mentioned one or two other mechanisms that can balance this out, but I'm curious, as a professor of economics, is there any scenario in which fiscal expansionism can be balanced out with other sectors of the economy to create a more conducive environment for all involved?
Yeah, the fiscal actions would be productive, would be seen to be having a positive impact if the spending is going into productive activities. Okay, look at the supplementary budget that we had, 2.3 trillion naira. Okay, and it's also worrisome to find that even the idea of a yacht, presidential yacht, was even contemplated in the first instance, at this point in time. So we should be conscious of the kinds of things we do with money, especially when much of it is borrowed. If you borrow money, or if the money supply, for example, is being used to enhance production, because that's my definition of inflation. Really, is when you're not having sufficient production. It's not about money supply. Some will argue, some would say, when you have too much money, in circulation under the quantity theory of money, money supply is what drives inflation. But essentially, for me, it is the other leg of it. If the money supply increase in money is meant to help us produce more, I don't think inflation will be a challenge. So what is at the bottom line is being able to produce. So we should be conscious of the kinds of spending that we do to be sure that whatever we spend on is that thing that will, is productive. So this is the time to spend money on agriculture, given the fact that food inflation is where the problem is. And the Economic Intelligence Unit, I want to disagree with the opinion.
Thank you.
That
Professor Uche Uwaleke,
okay.
You've spoken very well. I wish we had more time with you, but we're out of time. Thank you for your solutions that you've preferred. Hopefully the right authorities are listening and will take action. We appreciate your time here on Newsday.